Hello, Nye River Middle School 6th grade history. We got Mr. Dawson here again and Mr. Wagner.
Welcome.
We're going to go ahead and throw our screen in present mode.
So you just took the quiz, and now we want to start talking about where we're going to be in U.S. history, and that's right after the Civil War. And one of the big events right at the end of the Civil War, right before the total formal surrender, was the Lincoln assassination. And this is going to bring us into what time period that we're going
It's called Reconstruction. What does that mean exactly?
And that just means, well, reconstruct, put the country back together again, bring the North and the South back together again. And also, you're talking about roughly 4.5 to 5 million former slaves that are going to be put into society as well.
Yeah. So you'll hear it called Southern Reconstruction sometimes. Mainly now we just call it Reconstruction. This was a period from, 1865, right at the end of the Civil War?
To about 18, if you want to look at the exact history book date, it would say 1877.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be to bring everybody together, and did that work?
Not so great. No. I mean, they accomplished some things, but all in all, it was not a great success.
And that's one thing in history that we're going to learn is, sometimes you have these great intentions and it doesn't come out the way you want it to come out.
So now let's just talk about the Lincoln assassination here. So this happened what time period? During the Civil War, after?
Well, Lee had just surrendered to Grant. So this is, the Civil War is winding down. They had a couple other armies that still needed to surrender. And when we look through the slides, we're just showing the assassination, the pictures. I wanted to just focus on Lincoln just for a moment. Lincoln, one of our greatest presidents, when he started, you can see how he aged from 1860 to 1865. And of course, he grew that beard. And I don't know, that kind of aged, made him look older too. But if you look at these two pictures especially, you can see the war had a tremendous toll on his body.
It sure did. And this happens with a lot of presidents, folks. If you look at pictures of when they start being president and when they end.
And dark hair, they come out with gray hair.
Yeah, they'll come out with gray hair. They're going to look 20 years older. If you're doing the job right, it's a very stressful job, obviously, because you barely get any sleep, and it's a tough thing. So you can imagine how hard it was for Mr. Lincoln here.
He had tremendous responsibility over the bloodiest war.
Yeah.
Lincoln had several children, and like a lot of parents during the Civil War, they lost their children or their sons in battle. Lincoln lost a son. His name was Willie, but he lost that son to disease.
Yeah, he's the little guy down here in this picture, I think. Yeah.
So Lincoln, had a lot of, had some personal burdens too.
There was some question as to whether or not his wife was totally with it. Mary Todd, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And remember the Civil War, the devastation to the country. I mean, a lot of buildings. I mean, a lot of damage to cities in the South. We talked about the wounds that a lot of soldiers who survived carried, the amputations because of the weaponry, and we talked about the lead bullets.
Yeah, remember we had our lead bullet, if I can find it. So again, that's what's fired out of this rifle you're seeing on the screen, or something very similar to it. And that's why so many people ended up with amputated limbs.
And you had huge numbers of losses with the disease too.
Yeah.
And these were the two major generals. We had that on our Yahoo quiz last Friday. And of course, that's Robert E. Lee on your left, the Confederate general surrendered, and General Grant.
Yep. So the important word there on the screen, reconcile. You will see that again and again as we go through this section. Both of these men are important in our history in that even though they were on opposing sides and had very different viewpoints, at the end of the war, they wanted to get things back together. They wanted the country to move forward. Robert E. Lee was a very controversial figure in our history. He was the most famous Confederate Civil War general. But one thing that positive that can be said about him, at the end of the war, he did tell the South basically, hey, let's stop fighting. Let's end the war now. Let's get our country back together. So he can be remembered in a positive light for that, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Put the war behind. So Lincoln, right after the surrender, is he's elated because the war is going to be over soon, and he goes to Ford's Theater in Washington D.C. He really didn't want to go that night to the theater, but his wife kind of pushed him to get out. And originally, accompanying Lincoln was supposed to be Ulysses S. Grant and his wife. They did not attend, so instead, this Army soldier, I think he was a major, and then his wife, so a younger couple, accompanied the president and his wife. And you can see a picture of the assassination.
Yeah.
When Lincoln went to the Ford's Theater, he had a private booth, so a small private room to go in and watch, or a private section to watch the play. There was a door to it, and it was guarded by a police officer, right here, John Parker, whose job that was that night was to protect the president. He was outside the door. He maneuvered over into the audience a couple times, but unfortunately, he's not going to stay and guard the president.
Was there a secret service at that time, Mr.
No.
Wagner? No. Okay.
No, class, we're going to get into that a little more. I'm going to jump ahead. Presidents now are guarded by well-trained men and women as part of the Secret Service. And these men and women, you might see them attired in suits, but they would be carrying a lot of weapons. They would be probably wearing some kind of bulletproof vest. They are trained literally to get in front of the president. You can see President Obama right here. If there was any kind of threat, they would get their bodies in front of the president. So they're really putting their life on the line.
That's right.
But during the Civil War, during that time period,
let's see if we can go back here, folks. A couple of slides.
You did not have that kind of security.
So who's this gentleman here, Mr. Wagner?
And this is John Wilkes Booth. Now, John Wilkes Booth was really, really upset that the South had lost the Civil War. He was a Southern sympathizer. He was just totally full of anger.
Is he a Virginian or a Maryland person?
Well, he's kind of went, I think, more Maryland.
Back and forth in between, kind of. He was an actor, right?
Yeah, he toured all through the South, and he's from a distinguished acting family. So he was devastated when the South lost, and he's going to plan. He actually planned during the Civil War to kidnap President Lincoln, but he's going to go ahead and he's going to work with some other conspirators. And they not only planned to assassinate Lincoln, that was going to be John Wilkes Booth's, that's what he was going to accomplish. But these other folks, these other conspirators, were going to also go against the Secretary of State, the Vice President, and this is Andrew Johnson. They also were going to try to attempt to assassinate General Grant. Remember, we said he left. And then the Secretary of State, William Seward. So all these high level government officials, including the president, were all targeted to be assassinated.
Well, I'm glad all of them weren't assassinated.
No.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, Lincoln, who was assassinated, who's going to take over out of all those individuals? And it's going to be the vice president.
That's your vice president. That's still that way today. If something happens to our president, vice president is next in line.
So we have the Secret Service. So, unfortunately, when Lincoln's watching the play, John Wilkes Booth, the actor, because he was an actor, he could maneuver all over Ford's Theater, and nobody really was, thinking he was out of place. Now, he had his pistol and his knife concealed. The guard, John Parker, he left. He left to go to a saloon, I believe. John Wilkes Booth had at times, so when there was a loud amount of applause during the play, I think it was The American Cousin, it was called. He had at times, so he would enter and fire from a small pistol called the Derringer.
Did President Lincoln die instantly?
No, he did not. Okay. So after the shot was fired, this is a fairly graphic picture. Sorry.
Let's go back one. There we go.
He was shot right in the back of the head, and he did not die instantly. It was called a mortal wound, and a mortal wound means that you're not expected, you can't recover from it. And from medicine that we talked about before in 1865, they had no way to take the bullet out. Could he have survived something like that today?
Maybe, but still, any injury to the brain is very difficult.
He would have probably had, mentally could have been in
brain damage.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Lincoln was immediately taken to a house next door, and they pretty much propped him up. They tried to make him comfortable. Lincoln never regained consciousness, and he passed away at around 7:20 the next morning. And he he had his. It was obviously a very sad scene. His wife came in a couple times. His oldest son came in. It was a pretty dreadful time.
Absolutely.
The country, right after Lincoln was assassinated, and you can see a couple additional pictures. There's his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln.
And again, that's John Wilkes Booth
Yep.
there.
He's going to get on a horse. Now, right after he assassinates Lincoln, he's going to jump from the stage, and he's going to tangle his boot heel. You can just see the American flag. He's going to twist his ankle, break his ankle, and he's going to still get on a horse, and he's going to ride and cross. He's going to get out of town, and he's going to eventually end up in Virginia. So he's going to cross the river. Most of the conspirators,
What's that word mean for us, Mr.
people that are all involved in doing something, in this case, something pretty bad. So they were all involved in the assassination.
Yeah.
Remember, one was going to try to kill the vice president. Unfortunately, none of them were successful. And they eventually were caught, and they were all sentenced to death, and they were hanged. That was the method of execution. This lady here, Mary Surratt, she was the first woman to be executed in the United States. And this is from a movie called The Conspirator. There's a lot of pretty good movies out there about this event. Now, John Wilkes Booth is going to make it into Virginia. What's that town? Port Royal, which is down around Carolyn. I think it's Carolina.
It's not far from here, less than an hour's drive. Yeah.
And you can see the marker right here. He was in a barn. I guess he'd been driven into a barn, and the United States soldiers
surrounded
it and said, "Hey, surrender." And Booth refused to surrender. They set the barn afire to get him to come out. And before Booth could come out, this man here, one of the Union soldiers, must have got a little trigger happy. His name was Boston Corbett. And he fired a shot, and John Wilkes Booth was killed. So a lot of the answers about this event, we didn't get all the information. We didn't get all the information because he was killed. So it's 1865. Lincoln's been assassinated, a man who said all along, we're going to let the South up easy, that reconcile, let's come together again. He was succeeded by the vice president, whose name is Andrew Johnson. So that's where we're going to be starting in history.
So what do you see could have been some of the potential outcomes of his assassination? And how did it affect the way the North treated the South after the Civil War and that kind of thing?
A lot of people in the North were angry. A lot of people in the North, wanted revenge. A time when people really could have tried to come together. Now you had this event, and Lincoln was one of our greatest presidents, so it was a huge loss.
Yeah. Now after he was assassinated, what stance did Andrew Johnson take against regarding the South?
Yeah, Andrew Johnson was going to follow a lot of the policies of what is it called, the radical Republicans.
Okay.
And we're going to get into what those words mean, but some of his policies to the South were hard,
a little more punitive.
Yeah.
Intended to punish the South a little bit more than whereas
what Lincoln had intended.
Yeah, if Mr. Lincoln had stayed alive, it may have gone smoother. We may have had a better outcome in the end. Who knows? But go ahead, sir.
I think that's just about it.
That's about it.
One more. The word reconcile, again, some terms that we introduced new. Reconcile meaning kind of come together, be friends. Secret Service, the security that guard the presidents now. Unfortunately, we had some more presidents who were assassinated before the Secret Service came in, and then we had a president who was assassinated, John F. Kennedy, when we did have the Secret Service.
Yeah.
Mary Surratt's still a controversial figure because she was the first woman executed. She was one of the conspirators. And then you got that term Reconstruction, bring the country back together again.
Yeah, we're going to be studying about that for at least a week, maybe two,
Yeah.
Southern Reconstruction or Reconstruction. And there's lots of interesting topics within Reconstructions. Again, this is right after the Civil War, really trying to mend the country, put it back together, have a country again. I mean, we had been split for almost 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So there was lots of things to fix, and this was a new and exciting time and also scary time for all the slaves that had been freed in the South. So they were trying to be incorporated into society, and they had lots of struggles with that. and were mistreated at times, for sure. So we're going to be learning about all of that information in the coming weeks. So that's all we have for today. We want to thank you. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you soon. See if we can turn you off now.